1,500 police officers, 125,000 people, almost 50,000 statements across 150 miles of the M1 between London and Leeds, and the culprit has still never been found. Hello and welcome to another episode of Unsolved UK Crimes. Let's see if you can help us solve this one. You may or may not have read or heard about the M1 murders. The main name in the papers at the time was a young lady called Barbara Mayo, but our story starts with a young lady called Jackie Ansell-Lamb. She was an 18-year-old secretary who worked in Manchester and was described as very much a 60s teenager. On the weekend of the 7th and 8th of March 1970, she'd spent some time collecting belongings from her old house in London and attending a party in Earl's Court where she met a young man. On Sunday the 8th of March 1970, she attempted to hitchhike back to Manchester. She'd been given a lift by the man she'd met at Earl's Court to a slip road of the M1 in London, where she intended to hitchhike a lift up north. She then shared a lift with another man 50 miles up the M1 to Buckinghamshire. Ansell-Lamb was reported missing on the 9th of March when she didn't turn up in Manchester. The last place Ansell-Lamb was positively seen was a transport caff just off junction 20 of the M6 near Warrington in Cheshire. Between 9 and 10 p.m. she was seen in the caff in the company of a man. A number of witnesses cited her there, including a chef, Delia Brown, who said that a man came through the door, went up to Ansell-Lamb and then came to order 2 coffees. Brown said that she then saw him sitting with Jackie talking. The man was described as smartly dressed in business-like clothing. The pair left together and she got into the man's car. It's believed the car may have been a white Jaguar. A final unconfirmed sighting of Ansell-Lamb put her thumbing a lift on the A556 road, 1 mile from where her body was found. On the 14th of March, the partially clothed body of Ansell-Lamb was found by a 10-year-old boy and his dad as they walked through woodland in Mere, Cheshire, just off the M6 motorway, near the caff she was last seen at. She'd been essayed and strangled. Her body had been posed. She had bruises and cuts on her neck and face, which indicated she'd fought with her attacker. We move on to Barbara Mayo, who was a 24-year-old schoolteacher living in Hammersmith, London. Why then was she on the M1 in Derbyshire? Well, on October the 12th, 1970, she set off to hitchhike to Catterick, North Yorkshire, to pick up her boyfriend's car, which had broken down there. She never turned up, and 2 days after she left London, her boyfriend reported her missing. 4 days later, a family were out walking in an isolated wood just off the M1 motorway at Altucknell near Chesterfield, discovered a partially clothed body under a pile of leaves. Mayo had also been essayed. She'd been battered and strangled with a length of flex. She was found next to a secluded lover's lane named Oddmire Lane. Despite a detailed search, her bag containing her purse was never recovered. Barbara's body was officially identified on October 20th by her sister Marjorie. Scotland Yard said there's someone on the M1 looking for girls, and none of them are safe until this man is found. They believed that Barbara had been picked up at Watford Gap Services, meaning she'd have travelled for around an hour, with no idea what fate awaited her in those secluded woods. Barbara lived at Falkley Rockley Road in Shepherd's Bush. She taught part-time in Hammersmith. Her boyfriend was David Pollard, an electrical designer. She'd planned to travel along the M1, the M18 and the A1. Cafeteria staff recognised the picture and said that she'd got into a car around 4 p.m. on Tuesday evening. On Monday 26th of October 1970, police brought 120 miles of the M1 to a stop, and every vehicle at every junction and service station was stopped for 3.5 hours. Every driver was questioned. The technique is called dragnet policing. The headquarters of the investigation was at New Beatwell Street in Chesterfield. On Monday 2nd November 1970, a policewoman wore Mayo's clothes and followed her route up the M1. 20-year-old Miss Lindsay Wallace of Leek and from Stoke-on-Trent Police was chosen for the task. The policewoman was given cosmetics by the BBC makeup department and met Barbara's boyfriend in Barbara's flat in London. He was visibly startled. The media dubbed the killer of Mayo the monster of the motorway, or the motorway monster. The murder became infamous and was later described by investigating officers as being well and truly ingrained into local folklore. And having grown up around the area that Mayo's body was found, I can confirm it was local folklore. It's a story that we all grew up with. The brutal killing of Mayo led to what was described as Britain's biggest ever motorway hunt. The investigation into her murder was led by Detective Chief Superintendent Chris Pollard from Scotland Yard, as Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire Police had limited resources. 1,500 officers quizzed more than 125,000 people on motorways and took nearly 50,000 statements. In an unprecedented move, police set up checkpoints at 150 miles of the M1 between London and Leeds to ask drivers if they had any information. Publicity campaigns with posters posted all over Britain were launched. Police thought some men who gave lifts to females hadn't come forward because they didn't want their wives to know, and police appealed to them by saying that their wives wouldn't be told. A reconstruction was broadcast on television a week after the motorway checkpoints were set up, covering Mayo's last known movements. The reconstruction led to 700 people coming forward, saying they'd sighted Mayo. One significant sighting came from a man who said he was certain he'd seen Mayo or a girl fitting her description on 12th of October, thumbing a lift, then getting into a white Morris Traveller at Kimberley in Nottinghamshire. This was less than 20 miles from where her body was found. The witness said he'd driven past her thumbing for a lift, unable to pick her up. He said he saw in his rear view mirror her being picked up by a Morris Traveller, which he'd seen parked nearby moments earlier. The driver was described as being between 30 and 35 and medium build with mousy brown hair brushed forward. The witness said the vehicle followed behind him, heading towards the M1, and after both cars joined the motorway, he soon lost sight of the vehicle. Police believed that driver was her killer. At that time, there were 100,000 Morris Travellers on the roads in Britain, and each owner had to be traced and eliminated. And believe it or not, each one in the country was spoken to. But the driver of the Morris Traveller in question never came forward. Another notable witness who'd come forward was a butcher from Kimberley, who said that he'd thought she'd come into his shop and then walked down the hill towards the main road. No one came forward to say they'd given a lift to Mayo that day, which was unusual, as someone had to have driven her out of London to Kimberley. Several courting couples were known to have been in the area where Mayo's body was found at the time she was dumped there, but none of them came forward either. The records of 28,000 criminals were checked and 76,000 leads were looked into. At that time, Mayo's murder inquiry was the largest investigation ever mounted by one police force in Britain. Media reports suggested a link between the murders of Ansell-Lamb and Mayo, noting their clear similarities. During the investigations, a man claiming to be the killer sent a note to detectives saying that the Mayo murder would not be the last. But nothing else was received after that. When the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, began his spree in the 70s, Derbyshire police investigated whether the killings could be linked to Mayo's murder. Upon being convicted of the Ripper murders in 81, he was questioned in connection with her death. It was known that he'd owned a Morris Traveller and had travelled to and from London around October 1970, but Sutcliffe was eliminated from the investigation in 1997. By 1990, Cheshire and Derbyshire police believed the murders of Ansell-Lamb and Mayo could be linked, and in January 1991, the lead investigators on each murder case appeared on a joint appeal on Crime Watch, saying there were striking similarities between the cases. It was announced that Cheshire and Derbyshire police had decided to combine forces in an attempt to solve the two cases. A number of women came forward after the appeals to say they had been SA'd in the same area where Mayo was last seen. shortly before or after her murder. The lead investigator of the Ansell-Lamb murder case revealed on Crime Watch that forensic scientists had recovered several pieces of carpet fibre from Ansell-Lamb's body, believed to have come from a carpet roll or a carpet sample. On the weekend she was murdered, there'd been a carpet exhibition at Earl's Court in London. It was also noted that the man she was last seen with was described as a rep or a salesman, and that it was the investigators' belief that the murderer had some connections to the carpet industry. In the late 2000s, police investigated whether another serial killer, Peter Tobin, could have committed the murders, as he had just been convicted of the murders of 3 young women, including that of a hitchhiking girl he picked up and killed in 1991. However, police eliminated him from their inquiries. Criminologist David Wilson stated in a book on Tobin in 2010 that he was unlikely to be responsible and could be ruled out as a suspect by DNA, and that the DNA samples from the 2 murders had already been cross-referenced to Tobin's profile. In 2008, a reclusive man who had just died was found to have newspaper clippings regarding Ansell-Lamb's murder hidden in his house, alongside a confession to the murder of another woman, 19-year-old Lorraine Jacob, who'd been killed in Liverpool in September 1970. The man had previously lived in London, Manchester, Bolton and Wigan before he died of cancer. Investigators said there was no evidence linking him to Ansell-Lamb or Mayo's murder, and they pointed out that the man had no access to a car, never had a driving licence. In 2009, crime writer Scott Lomax revealed in a book he published about unsolved murders that Manchester City were playing in London at the time of Mayo's murder, just as in Ansell-Lamb's case, and that police had never investigated whether the killer could have been returning from the football match in London when he came across Mayo on the M1. In 2015, crime writers Chris Clark and Tim Tate published a book in which they claimed that Ansell-Lamb and Mayo's murders could be linked to Yorkshire Ripper Peter Sutcliffe. However, he'd previously been ruled out by investigators in 1997 through DNA. Upon Sutcliffe's death in 2020, Clark submitted a Freedom of Information request to the Home Office, asking if Sutcliffe's DNA was on the National DNA Database. The Home Office confirmed that it was, indicating that Sutcliffe can be ruled out of unsolved murder cases in which there is existing DNA evidence, such as the Mayo case. Notably, neither the Mayo or Ansell-Lamb case featured in the subsequent 2022 ITV documentary version of Clark's book. Investigators continue to regularly appeal for information on the murders of Ansell-Lamb and Mayo. The building where Ansell-Lamb was last seen is now Lime Truck Stop, and the culprit has still never been found. So, was it the Yorkshire Ripper, and did he manage to evade getting caught for these 2? Was it someone else driving a Morris Traveller? Was it a football fan returning from Wembley or London that weekend? No one knows, and I'm not sure anyone ever will. Please like and subscribe to the channel so you know whenever new episodes are available. Thank you for listening.